Setting lead type at the University of Regina. I'm starting off here with a sheet of paper. I've done a design for something I want to print, and I've printed it out from my computer in more or less the typefaces that I'm interested in using. Now, computers' bank of typefaces and reality are a little bit different. So we start off, as always, with the print media type guide. This is a visual index of all the typefaces that we have at the University of Regina. It's important to note that some typefaces are much more complete than others. So getting started on our project, we're going to reach for the Letterpress Worksheet. This is the written record of who's using what type, which typefaces they're using, and any other specific details. So we'll see that again in a minute, but in the meantime we're going to measure our maquette. I can't emphasize enough that plans versus reality with a 50 to 100-year-old typeface collection are not always going to sync up. But we're going to start with this thing. It's called a Pika Pole, and it's a special ruler that measures in centimeters and inches and points and pikas. Points as in 6-point font, 12-point font, and pikas as 6 and 12-point increments. The width of the widest part of our planned text is about 25 pikas. This thing is called a composing stick. A composing stick in this case is a small metal tray that's adjustable for width, and I'm laying it down on this little wooden contraption that allows me to lean the type so that it doesn't fall out. I'm going to start with this piece of metal. It's a lead slug. You're going to see I'm going to measure it against the Pika Pole, and it's 24 pikas. And we'll see in just a moment where I got this from, but I'm going to start by placing that at the bottom of my composing stick, sliding the adjuster into place, and then pushing down. All of our composing sticks are a little bit different. Some work better than others, but all of them are based on this general principle. So almost directly in the far corner, you'll see this setup. This is the different kinds of leading or slugs that we have available. We have everything from 4 or 5 pica width right up to 26 and then even larger from there. I'm selecting several identically sized 24s. So back to my guide sheet. I know that I want this top line to be a 12-point font. So I'm going to look through our catalog of fonts and try to find one that suits me best. I've lucked out here finding something in cabinet 001 in drawer number 3. So going over to cabinet 001, 1, 2, 3, there's our third drawer. I want to open that, but before I open, I'm going to open the drawer below it, about halfway. These drawers come all the way out. If you pull them too far, you're going to dump the type all over the place. That's called pieing the case. You really don't want to do that. So you open up the one just below it, about halfway, and then you can pull yours out almost entirely. And this is our little cheat sheet. By the time you're done this course, you probably won't need it, and we're going to talk about it again in just a sec. So placing my copy nearby, I get my composing stick. I've got at least 1, if not 2 slugs at the bottom, and I'll begin setting my type. More on that later as well. Before I get ahead of myself, I want to go back to my Letterpress worksheet, and I'm going to write down, in this case, the first line in the text line section, and any other pertinent details. I don't know the name of this font, and many of our fonts don't actually have names. We do know that it came out of cabinet 001, and we do know that it's drawer number 3. And if there are any other important notes that you want to make, here's a place to do it. This is a slightly atypical case. It actually contains 2 different fonts. It's at least 100 years old, which is why it's somewhat incomplete and a little mixed up. It's also why we're not going to use that particular case for our video today. So swinging around from one of the type cabinets, we're going to look to this. This is called a Galley Cabinet, and all of these little metal trays are called galley trays. You can take one out and stick your name on a small sticker on the left side. The stickers are usually attached by magnet to the side of the cabinet. And once again, back to my worksheet. And I've made some progress since I last showed you this sheet. I've decided all the different fonts and all the different cases for all of the different lines. Here I'm in cabinet number 5, and I'm going to go to case number 6. Case is the fancy word for a tray. So, anytime we open up a case, we're going to pull the one below it out about halfway, and then we can pull out the one we want to work on. This is really important. Here I'm going to show it to you again one more time. So now I can set myself up with a chair or a stool. I could even, if I'm very careful, remove the entire case and put it on a table. Most people work right in the cabinet. So my case is open. I've got a slug in the bottom of my composing stick, and I'm going to be setting a different line than we were setting a moment ago. I begin setting left to right. This is the most confusing and often most unintuitive part for anyone beginning with letterpress. The line I'm setting here says, on the personal authority and decree of. And in fact, I'm starting with the O, and then the N, and then a space, and then THE, and then space, and so on and so forth. I'm actually setting type left to right, but it's upside down. Here we're looking at the California job case, and the California job case is just a fancy name for the way in which type is laid out in these drawers. It's laid out akin to a keyboard. It's not in alphabetical order most of the time, with the exception of capitals on the right-hand side. And of course, even there we have exceptions, with the J and the U being in the bottom right. J and U having not really been invented for use in our alphabets until well after the initial establishment of setting up these sorts of cases by the earliest printers. One of the other things that you have to get used to doing when you're setting type is knowing about the anatomy of a piece of type itself. There's all sorts of discrete parts, but the ones that you're most interested in knowing about are the face, which is the letter or the number itself, and the nick. And the nick on every piece of type is in the same place. It's a groove that runs along the side that indicates down, the down position, when the letter is set correctly. When you're setting your letter in your composing stick, you can always see the nick because the letters are upside down. So, to reiterate, you're setting left to right the same way you would read, only the letters themselves are reversed because that's the nature of printing, and they're upside down. So, we're not going to watch me set this entire line, but what I can tell you is that it took me maybe 3 or so minutes. If I was a typesetter 100 years ago, it would take me considerably less. If it actually took me 3 minutes, I'd be run out of business or fired. So I'm making progress, and I'm just about done setting this line, and we're going to go in for a closer look. And in a second here, I'm going to freeze frame. What you should be able to tell is that I've written the words on the personal decree and authority of, but again, they're upside down and the letters are backwards. Now, if I want specific spacing here, in this case centered, on a computer, you highlight the line and you click a button. But this is manual typesetting. So if you want it centered, you're going to have to center it yourself. Every case should have at least a few spots, and they are indicated on the diagram, for different kinds of spacing materials, from very, very thin spacing to much wider spacing. You have a couple of different options if you don't have enough spacing in the case that you're working on. You can go to another case that's the same font size and use those. They're all interchangeable. Or if you're using 12 or 18 point font, you can go to these little plastic containers where we have lots and lots and lots of spacing material. So very carefully I have centered my line by eye in the middle of my composing stick. And I'm going to start by putting equal pieces on either side, basically filling in the gap. This is finicky work, and this is why it takes so much time to set up to print, and why it's so satisfying to print, because the printing itself goes so much more quickly. So going into my plastic container, I can find a variety of different thicknesses. They're all separated out, and again, whatever I put on one side, I'm going to put on the other side. By the time I get to the point where I've more or less solved the movement issue from side to side, I may have a slight asymmetry and be forced to put a very, very, very tiny spacer, either a brass or a copper one, in order to even it out. But typically this is not noticeable in the final printing. Here's a copper. It's a super thin shim made out of copper. And here's a slightly thicker brass version. These are both 12 point, but the actual thickness of the material is different. And those are used for fine tuning. So once my line is done and my type doesn't want to move from side to side, I can put the next slug in. And keep in mind, spacing is entirely up to me. I might want to use a 3-point spacer, or I might want to use 1 or 2 1-point spacers. I could put several 3 points together. Now skipping ahead, post-printing, we need to redistribute the type. That is, put the type back into the case. So do your best to put the spacing material back where you found it from. But again, it's all interchangeable as long as it's the same point size. And then begin redistributing the letters themselves. Usually you can pick up a word at a time. And so long as you know what the word is, it makes it that much easier to redistribute the individual sorts, the individual pieces of type back into the case. It's a highly satisfying job, maybe not the most exciting because the project is behind you, but it is a lot less stressful than setting the type in the first place. Now here's an interesting little example of why you want to know what the word is before you start looking at the letters themselves to put them back in. That's an N and a D we just looked at. And the only way to know what those letters are actually in most typefaces is to identify where the nick is, knowing that that is the downside of the type. And so that looking at the type from the front, looking at the face itself, we can distinguish between an N and a U, and a D and a B, and a P and a Q, and so on. Confused? It takes some time, but like anything, you'll get it eventually. Once your type has been redistributed back into the particular case, close the drawers back up, and move your type onto your galley tray for storage. Here you can see my entire form, and I'm pinching it really, really carefully to ensure that nothing moves. And I place it in the corner of my galley tray so that I have at least 2 sides keeping it from going anywhere, and using a strong magnet here to hold one of my slugs to keep the type from moving up and down. And then I can slide a piece of wooden furniture and another magnet to the left side so the type doesn't move. Now I can take this tray and proof it on the proofing press, or put it in the cabinet and print it later.